We can all say what we want from a game of D&D. Epic quests, a shenanigan or two, and a fun night in with lots of snacks. But what does D&D want from us? What does it expect from its players? This is a thick and chunky rulebook, which helps us get what we want from the game, but it relies on unwritten rulebooks that each of us have in our heads. D&D wants us to do a lot of work for ourselves, and that's hardly ever made explicit. So let's fix that today. My name's Rich, this is Renegade Rolls, and in answering this question, I've kind of stumbled across one of the absolute fundamentals of game design. First though, what does D&D want from us? Well, at its core, ever since the earliest days, regardless of whether you like D&D 24 over 2014, 5th edition over 3rd, 2nd, 1st, or even 4th, D&D wants players to have fun and to have the opportunity to embody characters which are different to their regular selves. How it does this, and how it encourages players to act in certain ways, is a much more interesting question. I see this as breaking down into three distinct areas. D&D's mechanics and the negative design space, where there are deliberately no rules, do some very clever things. 1. They help players feel like their characters are heroes. 2. They encourage players to take on the work which it wouldn't be fun to leave to chance or in-character roleplay. 3. They set players along the path of finding stories of progression and mastery. So what does all that look like in detail? A huge amount of space taken up in here is to help us simulate fantasy combat. That is a very deliberate design choice, and it's been the way the books have been laid out since the earliest editions. But why? It's because if you dropped the average D&D player, or to be precise, me, in a fantasy combat situation, I would die instantly. I could maybe swing a sword or shoot a bow, but statistically, I'd be a squishy commoner with D4 hit points. Competence in fantasy combat is way outside my skill set. So what does D&D do? Well, it gives me the tools as a player to simulate in slow motion what this fight would be like in a super granular way, so I can understand what the hell is going on. In a battle involving fireballs, thank you, Editor Rich, for editing that in later, slowing things down to 6-second rounds helps a lot. I can understand it better, well enough to do cool stuff, which makes me feel like the hero. D&D then gives me a menu of options within that time, split between actions, bonus actions, and reactions, so that, at least at low level, I'm not overwhelmed with choices, and I can begin to think tactically and make decisions that will keep me alive. Ludo-narrative harmony is a fancy way of describing something that D&D does so well. It breaks down the walls between me the player and me the character. But having said that, we know that the game wants our characters to feel like heroes, but there's so much more to the game which the mechanics can't cover. D&D assumes that we will take on the work which it just wouldn't be fun to leave to chance, and it wouldn't be fun to try and mechanicize. Skills which anyone in a fantasy world would have, like planning or teamwork, these don't have any mechanics on a sheet. You won't find the stats or facts and figures anywhere. If you look in the player's handbook, you will see so many pages devoted to combat and even more pages devoted to spells, but hardly any devoted to structuring the collaborative aspects of the game. This is something called a negative design space. D&D deliberately isn't prescriptive here. It gives room for the group to come up with an agreement and for the DM to create rulings. Also, notice the parts of D&D that we choose to narrate for ourselves, even when the outcome from the dice is already known. The "how do you want to do this" moments in combat and role-played social encounters. If we were to skip these parts, the experience around a table with our friends would be missing something, the element of TTRPGs which I think is unique to the medium. It's the random, it's the uncertain, combined with collaboration with our friends, that results in a story that we get to tell together, which will be unlike anyone else's. Have you ever started creating a character and looked at those high-level abilities for their class and had a vision about how cool it will be when they finally reach level 20? Of course you have. I have, loads of times. That dream of progressing your skills and mastering the game system and the universe is a core part of the power fantasy of D&D. This imagining of our character's future story is what keeps us dreaming about playing games between sessions when we should be doing more important things. The concept of a character going from humble beginnings to being stronger than the gods is a very attractive one, and it's one that you'll see time and time again in Appendix N, which is a section on recommended reading, which is in the back of every edition of D&D. You'll find that our old friend, the hero's journey, has been baked into the very core of D&D since the beginning. The gift that Gary Gygax and co gave us 50 years ago was to give us the tools to tell these heroic stories for ourselves. The game today follows in that tradition and really wants us to tell this story, and to find other tales along the way. There's a reason why players can pick up D&D, join a group and have a whale of a time without even having looked at a player's handbook. It's because everything written in the rulebook here is backed up by a huge amount of knowledge in our heads in unwritten rulebooks. This is a concept developed by S. John Ross, whose blog post on the topic I've linked in the description. These unwritten rulebooks that we all have are on a whole range of subjects and cover things like what we think life would be like in a medieval fantasy land. How easy is it to hike over a mountain? What a conversation would be like with a king? Each person at the table has different ideas in their unwritten rulebook based on their own experiences. But everyone will be roughly on the same page, at least most of the time. This is what allows rulings at the table to feel fair and natural. Ah yes, I don't feel so bad about my character being torn apart limb from limb by an owlbear, because that feels like a reasonable way for it to react to us, forcibly readopting its baby owlbear cub. In the monster manual, there's only a little bit of description on how owlbears behave, and despite adventuring parties stealing owlbear cubs on a regular basis, there is no explicit guidance on what a DM should do here. So as a group, we have to rely on our unwritten rulebooks. We're probably borrowing from our knowledge of owls and bears in the real world. Unless we have an expert at the table, it's likely that our unwritten rulebooks are going to be pretty flimsy, but similar in their assumptions. If the game we're playing doesn't have explicit rules for the scenario at hand, and there is a big difference between different players' unwritten rulebooks, that's when fights happen. Two amateurs with flimsy unwritten rulebooks could be equally certain that their version is correct. There is no way that an orc would bring their baby to a battlefield. Of course they would. Orcs are nomadic. Whole families would travel together all the time. These sorts of arguments can also happen when one player is a real-world expert on a subject. If we're playing a game in a steampunk setting where politics and intrigue are going to be core, and I happen to be super knowledgeable about Victorian flower language, or floriography if you prefer, but you can maybe identify a rose at a push, we're likely to run into problems. Yeah. Our unwritten rulebooks are going to have a big disparity. Fun fact, by the way, the preferred method in Victorian Britain for sending secret or passive-aggressive messages was to create nosegays, or tussy-mussies, which have different combinations of flowers to depict different meanings, or to ask questions when it would not be proper for the sender and recipient to ask such direct questions of each other. This particular clickhole, by the way, was a lot of fun. Highly recommended. Unless our game of choice has rules for floriography, does any system do this? I'd love to know, by the way. Then we'll be relying on the Game Master to make a ruling on what seems fair. A disparity in unwritten rulebooks like this could lead to upset in a narrative and storytelling context, but the biggest fights happen when we get into combat and spellcasting. It's the reason why D&D's rules are so explicit and granular about exactly how to go about hacking each other to bits. By giving so much detail, handling edge cases in all possible permutations of what could reasonably come up in a game, D&D is aiming to reduce reliance on the player's unwritten rulebooks and to try and keep things as fair as possible. Not that it stops people arguing about the most niche of things. You can tell you're in for a bad time when you hear things like this.
Master of Dungeons. It's a fine rope over there, but how many strands would you say it contains?
Hello, Game Master. Would it be fair to say that technically chalk was once alive?
Master of Games. What volume of blood would you say is contained within a mouse?
If you need to get out of this horrible mess, there is one line which keeps everyone sane. What are you trying to achieve here? When I came up with the idea for this video, I was convinced that I'd already seen something on it from Peter at Tales from Elsewhere. I asked him, and he said it sounded like something that he'd make on his channel, but he hasn't. Basically, I've managed to Mandela effect myself here. You should totally check out his channel, full of amazing Game Master advice, and if you haven't tried Clockworld, the system he's created, you are missing out. A couple of months back, the two of us sat down for a chat all about game design and RPG philosophy, and you can find the full hour-long chat on the Renegade Rolls Patreon. It's full of lovely things, including interviews with awesome people, exclusive bonus content, behind-the-scenes goodness, and access to a super secret corner of the Renegade Rolls Discord. All of this for just £3 a month, or $3 something in freedom units. I really do appreciate the support from everyone who's signed up already. You folks rock. Now that we know what D&D wants from us, we can use the same approach to think about what other TTRPG systems might want from us as well. By using different mechanics and different assumptions around play, if the GM and players buy into the premise of the game, they can create some very different experiences. There is a spectrum of trust between players and game masters, where rules-heavy games sit at one end and rulings-heavy games sit at the other. Pathfinder sits at one extreme end, with D&D a little bit further along. Games like Index Card RPG and Clockworld, of course, sit in that rules medium sort of in-between space and need some more rulings from the Game Master. Games like Lasers and Feelings or Fiasco sit right at this end, where it relies almost entirely on rulings and group agreement for the game to progress. A wonderful piece of sass that I first heard from our favourite orb, Trekiros, who in turn heard it from their mentor, presumably Primus, god of the Modrons, goes something like this. Pathfinder is a game that feels like it was designed to minimise the amount of arguments 15-year-olds have while playing it. Unfortunately for us, we're 30-something-year-olds who are capable of having adult conversations, so we're not the target audience. I'm not sure I fully agree with Trekiros' mentor's statement, but it's a really interesting way of thinking about it, that the more rules and specifics that we have, the less we're leaving to the imagination, and the less we're just leaving down to trust. Earlier I said that D&D encourages players to take on the work which it wouldn't be fun to leave to chance or to in-character roleplay. Well, this game, Mothership, takes a different view. For the uninitiated, Mothership is a sci-fi horror game, which when it gets into the real thick of it, is basically like Alien. It shares a lot of DNA with D&D and encourages some of the same sorts of storytelling. But what Mothership really wants is for its players to feel helpless in the face of alien horrors. It's got a surprising way of doing that. There aren't any overpowered stat blocks or insane special abilities for the monsters that allow this to happen. Instead, it takes something away that we take for granted as pretty central to D&D. Mothership has no stealth mechanic. There is nothing on the character sheet to indicate whether a character is going to be good or bad at hiding. What this means is that when the xenomorph comes prowling, you, the player, have to decide how your character hides. You describe them crouching inside a weapons locker, trying not to breathe, hoping the creature will pass you by. By taking a mechanic away, the designers are forcing you, the player, to be much closer to the fate of your character than you would be otherwise. By manually narrating this part of the game, we focus on it. If you, the player, choose a bad hiding spot, it will find you. This makes things so much more personal. If your character dies, you can't even blame your dice. It's entirely your fault. It becomes a much more present and a much more visceral experience. Situations like this need a lot of trust between the player and the GM. With no mechanic to rely on, the GM has to make high-stakes rulings every time. Will they judge fairly, or will it feel arbitrary to the players? Will everyone feel good about the outcome, even if it's bad for the character? We need trust between everyone at the table to do this well. It needs players whose priority, unlike Trek's mentor's Pathfinder players, isn't winning at all costs. It also needs a GM who isn't vindictive and is able to make rulings that feel fair and grounded in the pre-established fiction. These styles of games, to me at least, feel more grown up than the more adversarial ways of playing, which some D&D groups can default to. For me, it's finding the fun in the game, not in winning, but in the drama that happens along the way. Bonus perk for Patreons! I have made a list of some of my favourite systems and what I think they want from their players and from GMs. Also, how they go about getting everyone to play along, either through mechanics or through the setting and lore surrounding the games. I found this was a really interesting way to think about different systems and the differences between them. It's a properly fascinating topic, which I could discuss for days. There are a whole load of videos that I've got in the works on these concepts. The narrativist versus the completionist versus the simulationist gamer, and why, even though I enjoy all these aspects of the game, I am a narrativist at heart. Also a video about the concept of high-trust TTRPG adventures, which is different again. Please do leave a comment below if any of these particularly pique your interest. A lot of the time, the stories we want to tell at the table are well supported by the mechanics in D&D, but if you're playing with characters at high level, the game system can work against you. Finding relatable and human stories can be tough when the player characters are so powerful that they bear little resemblance to realistic people. But you'll be happy to know that this video has got you covered. How do you keep stories feeling personal when the party are literally fighting against gods? Is it possible to keep the tale grounded when you're battling in the stars? Go click over there to find out. I'll see you next time.